Mr. Speaker, before I start, I would like to echo the words of Minister Linares and my honourable friend Edwin J.S. and take this opportunity to congratulate the wonderful achievements of our sportsmen and women at the Island Games in Gotland and to Europa FC on their win last night. As always, Mr. Speaker, our homeland is doing great, and from this small corner of the House, I want to send them my heartfelt congratulations as the medals and victories keep coming in. Mr. Speaker, it was on this occasion a year ago that I stood up to address this House with my maiden budget speech. As it happened, this was also my first major contribution as an independent member of opposition, and I used it as an opportunity to make my intentions as such clear to both the House and to the people of Gibraltar as a whole. At the time, I was naturally anxious at the turn my parliamentary career had taken, but I was nonetheless always secure about the decision I had made. Over these months, I have been working hard towards meeting these intentions and trying to demonstrate to the electorate that I deserve the privilege they afforded me at the 2015 election. My status as an independent member has only increased the sense of responsibility I feel at serving the people of Gibraltar, and 12 months later, I can confidently declare that I have found my feet in the business of this House. For that, Mr. Speaker, I must thank you and your staff, Danny, Kevin, Francis, and of course Paul, for the guidance I have received in terms of parliamentary, clerical, and administrative procedures, as well as for the helpful advice that has been provided to me in the discharge of my responsibilities. As an independent member of this House, this assistance has been invaluable to me, as it is easy to feel somewhat adrift when one does not have the backing of a party machinery, or even the leader of the opposition's part-time salary. I have always found your staff approachable and willing to help, and I have never felt left to my own devices when finding my way through the practices of this chamber. Likewise, I am grateful to all my parliamentary colleagues for their support and encouragement, because while we may all have differing ideologies and approaches, I am in no doubt of the commitment that both benches have to our nation, a commitment that I constantly aspire to replicate in my endeavors. I feel particularly indebted to Minister Neil Costa, who has always treated me with respect and who has always shown himself willing to listen to my ideas and to the concerns I have taken to him. Many have been the times that I have consulted him outside the context of the parliamentary debate, and he has proved keen to engage with me and to develop a close partnership for the benefit of the people of Gibraltar. Finally, and most importantly, I would like to thank the many people who have reassured me, counseled me, and congratulated me, either in person or by other means. The kind words I have received over this time have further convinced me of my purpose in this House, and the apprehension I may have felt a year ago has been replaced with a stronger sense of conviction to serve this community and continue in the work that I have been carrying out since my first budget response. As I reflect on these past 12 months, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate what a steep learning curve my first year as a member of this House has been. There is a great deal that I have had to learn about diplomacy, negotiation, procedure, public relations, and the many facets that shape a modern politician. In many ways, in fact, this has been very much felt like going back to school, although in school I never got sworn at for failing to do my homework. But it is a learning process that I have enjoyed, and I look back at this year with both fondness and pride. I am proud of the fact, for example, that this year this House took the momentous step towards a fair society for all by legalizing single-sex marriage. I was encouraged that we acknowledge that our democracy is mature enough to recognize the rights of others, regardless of sexual orientation. It will be remembered, however, that I felt that the bill did not go far enough in eliminating the final bastions of discrimination in our community by allowing government employees to refuse to discharge their duties on prejudice grounds. To my mind, this groundbreaking bill that aimed to eradicate discrimination with one hand was devalued by allowing it with the other, undermining the Chief Minister's claim earlier this week that, I quote, "On this side of the House, we do not believe in discrimination." I remained unconvinced by the government's explanations and reassurances, as I felt they did not address the principle being protected. This is not giving same-sex couples exactly the same rights, as per the Chief Minister's assertion. I was therefore proud to have fought against this clause and was pleased that 3 members of the opposition broke ranks against their own leader and supported my amendment. This unusual act showed me that this is a House with a conscience, Mr. Speaker, and I dare say that there were more than a few individuals on the opposite side who would have liked to have done likewise. The debate we all had about mental health and the motion that was subsequently carried through also assured me, Mr. Speaker, of this Parliament's genuine commitment towards representing the interests of the less fortunate members of our society. There is no doubt that mental health patients in Gibraltar are now better served by the decisions we have made in this chamber, and we have repeatedly demonstrated that we have listened to the concerns of the most affected. What I was less encouraged by, however, was to see this debate tarnished by an opposition heavy in its criticisms but light in its proposals, and by a government focused on trumpeting its own successes while, as usual, belittling the efforts of the previous administration. This conduct is unbecoming of our status as politicians and does little to protect the vulnerable. Of far more value, I felt, was for me to engage with stakeholders in the mental health field, professionals, patients, and families, and to come up with a constructive strategy of proposed solutions to improve the services currently available to these individuals. At the same time, the amendment which I proposed eliminated all the unnecessary propagandist bluster in the process, showing that it is possible for the government and an opposition member to engage in constructive dialogue with the sole aim of helping our community and dispensing with the trivial games that so often blights Gibraltarian politics. I was pleased to see the government recognize these efforts and include some of my amendments while withdrawing elements of their own. My only regret, however, was that my opposition colleagues failed to acknowledge the merits of both the amendment and of my efforts, so I still feel that this was a wasted opportunity to show true unity in the House where the interests of our communities are concerned. Since then, and as a result of this motion, there has been some progress in how these interests have been further developed. In addition to this, I must, for example, congratulate the volunteers of the Samaritan Service recently established on the Rock, as this will give sufferers of mental health issues the independent telephone helpline and other help that we advocated in this House. This is undoubtedly a step in the right direction, but I am disappointed that some of the other measures that we agreed to, such as the publication of data related to mental health matters and the appointment of more educational psychologists with expertise in these fields, are yet to materialize. Where I sadly failed to enjoy the support of either side of the House, however, was in the issue of medical cannabis. This was an exciting debate, one that once again demonstrated that our community is more than ready to engage with controversial topics in an intelligent, mature, and passionate manner. The public discussion, which reached its zenith in the GBC Viewpoint program that saw this subject at its heart, exposed troubling discrepancies in government policy towards cannabis-related medications, with doctors unsure about their legal rights and patients frustrated about being denied treatments that could improve their quality of life. One could not engage with this debate, Mr. Speaker, without empathizing with the plight of members of our community who wake up to the prospect of constant pain, a reality that afflicts their lives and those of their families. This debate led to the government approving the use of Sativex, a cannabis-derived product that is widely available in the United Kingdom, but until then denied to patients in Gibraltar, or even worse, made available to only some. I was glad that the inconsistencies in this had been resolved as a result of this debate, but once again, I felt that these measures did not go far enough. I put forward a list of proposals that would have seen Gibraltar take the lead in the prescription, production, supply, and research into these products, a strategy that would have embraced innovative thinking in the field of medical science and would have provided both patients and doctors with further treatment options based on the benefit of a natural product. Sadly, I did not win the argument, but I am proud that I fought for this important cause and that I stuck to my progressive principles. I am confident that in time, these products will become increasingly available to local patients. But what saddens me, however, are the many pain tears that will be needlessly shed in the meantime. And in my inaugural budget speech last year, Mr. Speaker, I vowed to take the government to task on matters where I felt it was necessary. My record over this time has proved how committed I have been to this. I have drawn the government's attentions to issues as diverse as the worrying whole regarding student loan payments, where it transpired that government was not even aware of this historical debt, while local students were being chased up to pay debts defaulted by the government, of broken promises made to the private sector worker and pensioners association, who in this budget still receive little attention despite the Chief Minister's boasts about the conditions of local pensioners, of the contentious and now apparently politically trendy concept of co-education and how a focus on this should not detract from other priorities facing our education system, on the poor security of some of our schools, on the issue of taxi licenses, and even on the state of the paving in Main Street. In some of these cases, Mr. Speaker, government has itself commended my contributions and has taken action on the issues I have raised. On other matters, regrettably, they have not been so forthcoming. For example, Mr. Speaker, I congratulated government on making the Victoria Stadium a smoke-free zone, but I proposed a further ban on smoking in children's play parks. This is something which government said they would review, but as yet nothing has materialized. And my opinion, as well as one shared by many parents, is that this common sense solution should be implemented with no further delay. There are also still grave questions that need answering on some aspects of the purchase of the new Calpe House building. Our community is rightly very proud and fond of this institution, but the asbestos issue has cast the light of scrutiny on some seemingly opaque practices, leading me to call for a government-led investigation, calls that have hitherto fallen on deaf ears. I have fought this fight on my own, but it is one that I am willing to continue until this Parliament gets the answers that it deserves. Likewise, I famously challenged the government on school lunches, a matter that still does not seem to have been satisfactorily resolved. In some of these cases, Mr. Speaker, I have found the government's response to be evasive, defensive, and in this last example, downright belligerent. All of this, Mr. Speaker, flies in the face of the nonsensical accusations that have been leveled my way that my role is to be a cheerleader for this government. The evidence clearly demonstrates that nothing could be further from the truth. I have criticized government on a wide range of issues, but where I have disagreed with them, I have tried to offer pragmatic solutions rather than standing on the sidelines picking holes. And when I have agreed with them, I have said so because Gibraltar is as fed up of criticism for its own sake as it is of those constant reminders of the GSD's 16 years in office. In fact, Mr. Speaker, those detractors may wish to consider instead those times when I have supported the GSD opposition in their dealings with government. I fervently agreed with them, for example, on the issue of the lamentable state of the North Front Cemetery and wholeheartedly supported the motion tabled by my honourable colleague, Trevor Hammond. And I am sure that he matches my disappointment in seeing that this House's resolution has not yet completely rectified the situation. Like the rest of the opposition, I also express concern at the £300 million mortgage taken on government housing estates, a matter which I will take up more forcefully later in my response to the budget, but which at this point serves as an example of the times when the entire opposition has been united on a matter of grave importance. I have appreciated the opposition's support on some of the other issues I have raised, particularly that of staff morale and discontent at the employment practices in the GHA, an issue which I first raised in this House and which has been pursued further by my opposition colleagues. Despite this department's huge budget, one that is warranted given its importance to our community, the GHA still went over budget by 15% in the last financial year. For this cost, we would not be blamed for expecting a Rolls-Royce service that is fit for the purposes of each and every one of our citizens. Instead, however, we are seeing a staff that feels demoralized and burnt out and which recently threatened to walk out over these conditions. Likewise, we are seeing patients who, as a result of this mayhem, find themselves lacking confidence in this most crucial service provider. There are also concerns about how the integration of the care agency with the GHA is being handled. The care agency employees are apprehensive about some posts being eroded by this process, and it is clear that there needs to be more detailed consultations with employees as this delicate negotiation proceeds. A common complaint among care agency and GHA employees is the lack of response to their concerns, and I am sure that they would appreciate greater openness and inclusion as these important decisions are made. Mr. Speaker, I will continue to take this government to task on issues of health and also housing, because most of the priorities concerning the many constituents who have come to see me over this time have revolved around these two portfolios, and I will continue to fight on their behalf, be it on my own or with the other individuals sitting on this side of the House. Because this is not about party politics, Mr. Speaker, but about doing what is right. And besides, I am a 41-year-old mother of 4. I think my cheerleading days are long behind me. Instead, what Gibraltar needs are politicians of conscience and of a sense of responsibility, and working towards meeting those expectations is all that matters to me. Education is another important policy for our priority for our community. Mr. Speaker, I have been determined to continue my involvement in this area with regular meetings with the Gibraltar Teachers Association and by reaching out to the main stakeholders in the educational field, namely teachers and support staff, parents, and of course students. It must never be underestimated that teachers are responsible for the future of our community, and we must never set them or the students in their care up to fail in this responsibility. Government must support educators as their current successors will breed future ones, and unfortunately, I have often found myself dismayed to learn about the issues that teachers confront on an almost daily basis. We are talking about a profession with noble intentions and with the interests of students firmly at heart. But sadly, we are also talking about one that is regularly frustrated and demoralized in the exercise of its crucial duties. A main complaint is that of environment. Many of our school buildings are in a serious state of disrepair. There are issues of overcrowding, of underinvestment, and of facilities and equipment that are well past their sell-by dates. How can we expect our teachers and students to thrive in these environments? 5, 6, 7 new schools have been promised within this term of office. I don't know how many. But so far, we have seen little of substance, one has to admit, with teachers instead facing the uncertainty of rumors and having to deal with a make-do culture that is inappropriate to the demands of the profession. There are also issues with recruitment, selection, and promotion, with schools sometimes having to wait lengthy periods for vacancies to be filled. This has a significant impact on school planning and continuity, as well as on pupil progress. Furthermore, these periods of uncertainty have a devastating effect on teacher morale and on the very fabric of a school's staff. It is clear that a far more modern and expeditious process is required, not just new schools, and one that moves away from tiresome bureaucracy and that more truly reflects the needs of schools. Head teachers should not have to face having to prepare for new school years without their school's complement being filled, and a proactive system that preempts forthcoming vacancies would go a long way towards ensuring an efficient process that would ultimately best benefit our students. Security, Mr. Speaker, is another grave concern for Gibraltar's teachers. It is a sad reality that access to some of our schools need to be more tightly regulated. I do not feel that this is the correct forum to give precise details on some of the holes in the security of particular schools, but I welcome the Minister of Education's commitment to rectifying this situation as soon as possible. Because the reality is that we cannot continue to expose our teachers to any dangers that are presented by their profession and by the current times, and I am pleased to see that this is being made a priority. Likewise, we also need to recognize that the ICT provision and support in our schools is failing to keep up with the advances of the technological age, placing education at a significant disadvantage. Our students need to be supported to succeed in the world of tomorrow, and this requires investment in the ICT of today. It is simply not acceptable for teachers and students to have to work with outdated and occasionally faulty equipment, and proper investment in these areas will demonstrate to these stakeholders that their contribution to our society is valued. Mr. Speaker, there are also concerns about the program that is currently offered in our secondary schools. While it is right that we celebrate our school successes at GCSE and A-levels, we also need to consider what is on offer for students with different abilities who can still make a valuable contribution to our community when given the correct support and curriculum. A clear vocational program with long-term aims needs to be designed in order to address this gap in our educational sector, ensuring that there is no shortage of skilled labor in the Gibraltar of the future. The College of Further Education's role in all this should also be examined, given that some of its former responsibilities have now been redistributed to the secondary schools and to the University of Gibraltar. The educational sector, Mr. Speaker, is being placed under tremendous pressure to succeed amid very difficult circumstances. And it is a testament to the integrity and professionalism of teachers and support staff that our students are succeeding despite these difficulties. They also raise issues in areas such as lunchtime provision and health and safety in schools, all valid criticism from the people at the front line of education. Many point to the University of Gibraltar and question why our younger students cannot have access to similar investment. And of course, many in the profession would also welcome precise details about how the move to co-education is going to be implemented, with teachers and parents expecting clarity on what could potentially be one of the most important educational decisions our community will be facing in generations. And by ignoring our educators, Mr. Speaker, we do a huge disservice to our children. And our children now need to be placed at the forefront of our priorities, Mr. Speaker, because Gibraltar is facing one of the most turbulent and uncertain times in our history. The result of last year's EU referendum has made many Gibraltarians feel uneasy about our future. There is a natural concern about how Gibraltar will continue to prosper outside the common market and about how our neighbours may exploit the situation to further their ambitions and make life difficult for Gibraltarians. The assurances that have been given by the UK government are welcome, but they do not fully eliminate the doubts we now face. Of course, this situation is not one of our choosing, but we must nonetheless accept it and present Gibraltar's case with both eloquence and passion. And to that end, Mr. Speaker, I presented a submission to the House of Lords EU Select Committee's inquiry into the implications of Brexit for Gibraltar, the only elected member of this opposition to do so. I felt it was my duty as a parliamentarian to supplement the government's submission and clearly communicate the concerns among our community. It is easy among the talk about the economy, trade, movement, customs, and all the intricate technicalities of a Brexit negotiation to forget the human angle, and I felt it was important to impart to the committee the worries of the average Gibraltarian who faces this future and this uncertainty. These worries were confirmed, Mr. Speaker, when the EU's negotiating guidelines revealed the infamous Clause 22, now Clause 24, that effectively grants Spain a double veto over Gibraltar issues relating to Brexit negotiations. Once more, it was necessary for Gibraltar's politicians to mobilize themselves in defense of our rights as the world's media spotlight cast a bright light on this injustice. I appeared on both British and Australian television and radio, while also submitting articles to international publications continuously defending Gibraltar's cause and drawing attention to the hypocrisy of Spain and the EU's stance. At these times, Mr. Speaker, I have consulted the members opposite and ensured that Gibraltar was presenting a united front on all matters relating to Brexit. I have given the government both time and space to coordinate their efforts in these troubled times and have offered them my support and my advice for what it's worth. And I have done all this, Mr. Speaker, because this is a time too critical for party politics and partisan priorities, and one instead of concord in our vision for a post-Brexit Gibraltar. I have spoken to visiting MPs and MEPs, and while I might feel that the Brexit Select Committee should be meeting more regularly, I have taken my membership of this body seriously simply because Gibraltar cannot afford for this to go wrong. And it will not go wrong, Mr. Speaker. Gibraltar has weathered so many storms that fate and injustice have thrown in its path, and we have always emerged stronger and more dignified. We have coped with sieges and floating batteries, with bombs and evacuations, with closed frontiers and naval incursions, and I have no doubt that once again, Gibraltar will emerge from this confusion as a prosperous and thriving community, as ever, an example for the world to follow. My attention, Mr. Speaker, now turns to this year's budget. The annual debate of the government's financial plans for the year ahead is a necessary demonstration of the openness and transparency required in a modern democracy. Parliamentarians should never forget our responsibility towards the taxpayers of Gibraltar, and it is imperative that these discussions are had. The issue of such transparency has been given significant focus by my opposition colleagues, especially Roy Clinton, who have been calling for a public accounts committee to be set up in Gibraltar. I sympathize with the principles behind this plea, Mr. Speaker, but I also understand the government's concern with the logistical and administrative problems this could cause. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, you better than anyone will probably remember that my father's AACR government adopted a similar move in the 1980s, only to find the system unsuitable. So in an attempt to satisfy both sides of the argument, I once again repeat my call, as I did last year, for an autumn budget statement, similar to the one had in the United Kingdom. that will add a layer of transparency and accountability to how the government uses Gibraltar's money. This would present a valuable opportunity for parliamentarians to monitor spending without overtaxing civil servants with tasks that may remove them from directly serving the public, and I trust that a government that has always prized transparency will not hesitate to consider the idea. But for now, I would like to thank government for providing this year's budget book. But I feel compelled to ask, though, where is the other book? The one with the details of borrowing and spending of all government-owned entities, and most importantly, the spending that has conveniently been kept out of the public eye through financial engineering and legal opinions. Because, my honorable friends, we are being asked to assess a budget that is incomplete and presents only a part of the government's borrowing and spending. There is an equally important budget of borrowing and spending that is never reported, debated, or accounted for. This must change. Otherwise, this can feel like a hollow process and one that does not give the appropriate scrutiny to how Gibraltar's finances are handled. There is no real distinction between the government's usable cash reserves and the pools of cash held by government-owned companies. Similarly, there is no material difference between the debt held by one public entity and another. It is all public debt, just as all government spending is public spending. It should all be reported and accounted for to Parliament in this budget. And pretending there is a difference and labeling some of the government debt as unrelated to the public sector is doing a great injustice, and the people of Gibraltar cannot be kept in the dark any longer. Across the community, Mr. Speaker, there is a growing demand for the government to present the true picture of public finances and spending. It may be a tough fact to swallow, but public debt includes the borrowing of public sector entities. This is the case in the UK, in the EU, and across the world. Otherwise, Mr. Speaker, does it not show the budget process to be little more than a sham? Mr. Speaker, our government taxes and borrows in order to meet planned expenditure. So therefore, I petition the government to report on all current and planned government expenditure. This is the only way to prevent our people feeling that they are being kept in the dark about what is being spent by government-owned companies. It is wrong, Mr. Speaker, to pretend that this spending is unrelated to public sector, and I urge government to rectify this issue in order to achieve the full transparency that this electorate deserves. It is illogical, Mr. Speaker, that what is missing from this year's budget is the largest financial transaction undertaken by the government this past year. A £300 million loan mortgaged over the lion's share of government-owned housing, our prized assets. £300 million amounts to over 97% of net public debt forecasted for March 2018. It is hugely material to the budget presented. And as much as we may be lured to believe that this loan is an investment in Gibraltar, the cold fact is that it is not an investment. It is a mortgage on our estates. When the term investment is used to describe a loan, people are being misled in a fundamental and diametrically opposed way. It is abundantly clear that the groups that lent the money to the government did so in return for a first lien on 80 estate buildings and a government guarantee to return the capital with interest. So let's be very careful about what we are doing and saying here. If we are saying that the London lenders who provided the capital are bearing the risk of the investment, then we are also saying that there is a chance that the government will default on the £300 million loan and the estate homes repossessed. So, what are the government's spending plans for the £300 million? How much has already been spent? What are the returns from this spending that our estates are collateralizing? This is also the budget that I would like to hear about. And I cannot sit idly by and watch the people of Gibraltar presented with only half the story. We deserve more, Mr. Speaker, much more. Government has said that this borrowing is earmarked for infrastructure and other profitable ventures, not manifesto commitments or ordinary government spending. However, we are yet to receive in this budget or elsewhere detail of the actual use of proceeds. Gibraltar has made a significant infrastructure investment in the east side that has been looking for a developer for several years. How does the government plan to be more successful with additional infrastructure investments and land reclamations while the east side reclamation lies barren? Much of regular government spending, such as roads, parks, health services, education-related spending, and university fees, have no specific identifiable monetary return. Can the government guarantee that the borrowed money will be used to invest in projects with a higher return than the return promised to our lenders? What is the planned timing for the undisclosed spending? If we are indeed headed towards harsher times, then we need to tighten our belts and take prudent measures rather than doubling down by borrowing large amounts at a time of increased Brexit-related uncertainty. We should be protecting our borrowing capacity rather than burning straight through it. For the sake of transparency and accountability, Mr. Speaker, it is important for a broad range of information on public sector liabilities, obligations, and contingencies to be made readily available, whether or not formally included within government balance sheets. Concerned Gibraltarians see the increase in off-balance sheet borrowing from the savings bank followed by the estate's mortgage as clear evidence that the government has overstretched financially, and as a result, it is now having to mortgage the family silver. But how can government reassure us to the contrary when we are not actually entitled to scrutinize them? Debt is highly addictive, Mr. Speaker. The more you borrow, the more you need to continue borrowing to keep up with the increased spending levels. If the government's first term spending was partially funded by the debentures of pensioners and savers, and the second term by the mortgage of our housing estates, how will the commitments of a potential third term be funded? When we increase borrowing and spending in an unsustainable way, we are selling off our future income. We are spending today our children's income of tomorrow. And Mr. Speaker, we live in a world that does not respond well to a lack of transparency. We have witnessed economies suffer and even collapse as a result of incomplete government reporting and unchecked spending. Typically, when the actual state of government finances emerges, addressing the problem becomes costly and painful. We need Gibraltar to run a sustainable, responsible, and fully transparent sector. There is no viable alternative, not even on a temporary basis. The stakes are too high. It is not important who started borrowing and spending off balance sheet. What is important is who has the courage to end it. I implore the government to find that courage for the good of our democracy and for the security of our future. The budget, Mr. Speaker, is also an exciting time for a politician because it sees the Gibraltarian public engage more directly with this House. To this end, I publicly invited Gibraltarians to submit issues and concerns that they would like raised in this budget session. Their responses ranged from much anticipation about the long-awaited tunnel, which is causing chaos and mayhem on our roads, to much concern on general government overspending, or even to an elderly gentleman telling me that he was denied use of the hydrotherapy pool due to lack of manpower, as was the excuse given. So, Mr. Speaker, it seems we cannot even get our basic needs to run smoothly, and yet there we are borrowing 300 million that we cannot even ask questions about. The state of our schools was also a big worry for many parents who spoke to me about the deplorable conditions of the toilets and walls, with classrooms suffering from lack of heating in the winter and air conditioning in the summer. And even if, Mr. Speaker, we have been promised 5, 6, 7 state-of-the-art new schools within this electoral term, this does not excuse what our children and teachers are enduring in this day, every day. Unsurprisingly, I received a number of complaints from parents about the state of St. Martin's School. These range from severely cramped conditions to the fact that porter cabins seem to have been added to the most impractical of places. This is causing chaos at pick-up and drop-off times, particularly for children in wheelchairs, and I can only imagine what the situation must be like on rainy days. And even if a state-of-the-art new school is planned for St. Martin's, Mr. Speaker, the current building cannot be neglected in the meantime in this way. I also received concern about the shortage of businesses open on weekends, especially when cruises are in town, as well as the lack of tourist attractions open on bank holidays. This dents our tourist product and economy at a time when we should be looking to be more dynamic than ever, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, offering our citizens a chance to express their thoughts and ideas about the current state of our homeland made for an interactive exercise that reflected the anxieties of the average Gibraltarian. In addition to mentioning these issues at this stage, I would like to reassure the respondents that I will be drawing the government's attention to their concerns over the course of the parliamentary year and hope to get helpful and purposeful answers over the course of these debates. Individuals from the finance sector, for their part, also reported some reflections. With reference to insurance firms, in enterprise, we have seen a failure that sent shockwaves across Europe, yet any introspectiveness has been slow to progress, and if there have been findings, they have not been made public. If we see another failure on this scale, can we recover, is the question. And as for gaming, with Paddy Power and Betfair leaving Gibraltar and 888 and others mulling their positions, can we continue to use our tax regime as the primary draw for gaming firms? Access to the EU is no longer on the table. Uncertainty prevails, yet the current administration has placed us in a position of debt, the extent of which we have never seen and cannot see at the moment. Is austerity their answer? Is this another sign of a dark budget that must be brought to light, Mr. Speaker? We have also seen Barclays leave and Newcastle Building Society recently announce its departure. Last year, NatWest revealed that 13 staff members are being made redundant, despite the high-profile departure of Barclays. Why are we seeing workforce being trimmed when there is more demand on their service? We should seek assurances that they would remain, Mr. Speaker, because we need a global bank for our global marketplace. With reference to distributed ledger technology, we must be cautious in our approach to the regulation of virtual currencies, which are still immature and subject to skirt money laundering laws and legislation relating to the financing of terrorist activities. We must ensure the same strong controls and diligence that we hold our financial services to should not be compromised in our attempt to attract these firms to Gibraltar, and no shortcuts to regulation should be put in place. We should work with the early pioneers in these fields while being bold in seeking to be a global leader in this space. These are all valid questions and concerns from experts in this field, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward to raising their concerns more directly in Parliament and receiving suitable clarifications and reassurances from the government benches. Because this is exactly what this budget process should involve, Mr. Speaker. This is a debate, an exchange of ideas where we consider various views and form conclusions based on what is best for the community we represent. And as a member of the opposition, it is my duty to challenge this bill and continue taking the government to task. It would be remiss of me not to raise the many concerns that are being expressed by members of the financial sector about the lack of clarity and transparency in this budget. I am disappointed that some of the issues I have raised about education, health, housing, transport, and many others are being neglected. and I worry about how sustainable these public debt figures are for our community. And I pray that the government is correct in all its calculations and reassurances. However, I must say I find the opposition's unprecedented decision to vote against this budget irresponsible, cynical, and completely against the interests of Gibraltarians. Irresponsible because if it were to take full effect, the consequences to this community would be devastating, paralyzing our community in its entirety, from our schools to our economy and our essential services. None other, Mr. Speaker, than Sir Peter Caruana himself, who has been dubbed as the greatest Gibraltarian of all times, although maybe I have a different view about that. The GSD's own erstwhile leader once remarked that it was important for all parliamentarians to vote in favor of the budget, and I quote, in order not to deprive the government of funding and civil servants of their pay. I therefore find this move to be little more than a cosmetic and sterile marketing stunt that smacks more of desperation than it does a responsible approach to politics. I have decided instead to put the interests of Gibraltarians first, as did the greatest Gibraltarian of all times. It has been a long-standing tradition for politicians in this House, in an act of statesmanship and responsibility, to vote in favor of budgets, even if, as is the case with this one, they have honest doubts about them. I will not deploy gimmicks which undermine the welfare of civil servants and basic public services, if only symbolically. And I will not allow my vote meant to represent only these interests to be abducted in this way. I will therefore honor this long-standing convention and vote in favor of the budget, notwithstanding the many criticisms I have already made. But this support, Mr. Speaker, comes with a word of caution. I urge the government to heed the concerns that have been expressed from these opposition benches on issues of transparency and rigor. These concerns are not just from the mouths of opposing politicians, but also from financial experts and members of our community who are genuinely anxious about our nation's spending. The questions that are being asked are legitimate ones, and the government needs to address them, because if the government does not heed these concerns, it may find that it will not just be opposition votes, that it will risk losing. So to conclude, Mr. Speaker, we are coming to the end of an eventful period, both for myself and for the political world as a whole. As I look back over these past 12 months, though, I find myself increasingly secure in my role, a far cry from any doubts I may have had when I addressed this House at the last budget session. From what has been termed by some as this rocket chair, where two former chief ministers have sat before, from the minority status that has in times been enjoyed by the likes of Joe Bossano, Dr. Joseph Garcia, Peter Montegrifo, and Sir Peter Caruana, I have been able to discern my role most clearly, to provide a constructive opposition, one that challenges the government when it is warranted, but supports it when it is deserved. My role here is not to simply pick holes, but to help fill them, and to provide Gibraltar with the honest and productive democracy it merits. My position has given me an invaluable vantage point from which to obtain a true sense of the needs of our times. Mr. Speaker, I have come to realize that this is a time for courage, not cowardice, a time to step forward and show face, not to hide behind fake profiles, a time for leaders, not mouthpiece activists, a time for stability, not disarray, a time for solutions, not problems, a time for criticism, not ridicule, a time for constructive proposing, not destructive opposing, a time for hope for a better future, not a craving for chaos in order to reach one's personal goals, a time for conviction, not indecision, a time for leading, not infighting. It is, Mr. Speaker, a time for something new. People all over the world are crying out for a new kind of leadership, Mr. Speaker, one that reflects the real hopes and aspirations of the people, built on the values of generosity and closeness, on honesty, and on a bold, optimistic approach to politics. In response to massive global challenges, people are starting to vote not only with their minds, but also with their hearts. I believe that here too, in Gibraltar, people want politicians who are close, honest, and understand their real aspirations. Politicians that work for their citizens, not for partisan visions, egos, or agendas. I became an independent MP because I was not ready to let myself be dragged into the mire of mudslinging politics. I will therefore not respond to insults and petty accusations thrown at me in this House, nor will I engage with social media bullying, through fake profiles or not even, for example, with the leader of the opposition who hides behind the profiles of members of our community to fight his battles against me. And you, Mr. Speaker. And you. And you. And you. And you, Mr. Speaker. Stand up and be counted.
Point of order,
May I ask? Order.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker.
Order. May I ask the Honourable Lady to sit down? And I ask the Honourable Leader of Opposition to sit down and not to dare to shout at me. I have told him before that I am not prepared to have him shout at me. If you want to raise a point of order, you do so calmly, but you do not shout at the Speaker. Right? If he's in doubt as to where that comes from, you can read through this, as I was doing yesterday afternoon, anticipating as I was, some trouble. Now, what is your point of order? And tell me, what is the standing order? What is the rule? What is the rule from this book under which you are raising your point of order?
Mr. Speaker, the point of order is very simple. The Honourable Lady has got to make herself responsible for any allegations that she makes before this House. She has said that I am hiding behind a fake profile or a profile from a member of this community. That is utterly false, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, if she has any evidence in relation to that, she should bring it. Or what she can do is not hide behind parliamentary privilege and therefore make the allegations outside where at least I can then basically challenge her, Mr. Speaker. That is Mr. Speaker, there is a rule in this House that you cannot make allegations without making yourself responsible factually for them. And what she has said is utterly not true, Mr. Speaker.
I am grateful for that, and I think it's very important for the Leader of the Opposition to demand clarification. I actually know the person that the Leader of the Opposition hides behind, and I met him in Irish Town and asked him why he was speaking against me about the Calpe House, Mr. Michael Bain, and he told me, well, you know, it's the Leader of the Opposition who uses my profile, and I told him, there's a very easy way. Mr. Speaker, can I speak now? Because I didn't interrupt him. I said, there's a very easy way to stop that by changing your Facebook profile. And he shrugged like he didn't really feel like he wanted to ask the Leader of the Opposition to do that. So I am very, very comfortable with what I'm saying in Parliament, and I want the media to know that they are welcome to interview me outside whenever they want, and I will repeat the accusations because I know that they are true, and I was told by the very person. Otherwise, I would not be so irresponsible. And let me say, Mr. Speaker, he also attacks you under the profile of Michael Bain. Anyway, if I can carry on. Yeah, what's outrageous is for the Leader of the Opposition to be using another member of the community's profile instead of dando la cara as the Leader of the Opposition should. Okay? Yeah, it's very outrageous. It's never been seen before. Yeah, I'm destructive. I'm destructive to your aspirations.
Since 9:30 this morning, we have had an excellent debate in which very, very high standards have been achieved and which elected members have been doing the business for which the electorate have put them here and pay them, by and large, most handsomely. I would urge honourable members to keep to that high standard. It is a pity that at the end of nearly 4 hours of excellent parliamentary debate, anyone, by an injudicious word, should lower the standard and bring the House into disrepute. I urge honourable members for the rest of this session, keep your cool, don't shout, keep your cool. If you don't, one of you may have to sit in this chair, because I am not prepared to allow this House standards to be lowered. I have always said that I am the Speaker of Parliament, dedicated to maintaining the dignity of this Parliament for the sake of the city and the nation that we all love. So keep your cool, and let us see if we can finish the session, renewing tomorrow morning as we have done up until now. The Honourable Lady.
Mr. Speaker, as I was saying, I did not leave the comfort of a party bench for this, and I did not expose myself to attacks from both sides of the House to engage in a childishness that disappoints and alienates the electorate. This is the real toxic behavior we suffer from, Mr. Speaker, and I have moved away from this for good. My job is to propose and to be useful for the Gibraltarian electorate, and this is what allows me to stay relevant, even if I am on my own. So I will continue working for the good of the people of Gibraltar, regardless of how this impacts on either parties of the House. I work for them now, not for any of you. So I feel that this direction, this new direction, is just beyond the horizon, that these uncertain times are calling for an end to a stagnant political scene that has been dominated by the same two parties for over 25 years. These 12 months have shown me that I am ready for the next challenge in my political career, to offer Gibraltar new options, new ideas, and new directions. I have proved that there is room in this House for a different way of doing politics, and I hope that the people of Gibraltar feel excited like I do about the possibilities that this could offer. I face the next year with optimism, with energy, and with an unshakable belief that the next 12 months will see us all emerge stronger together. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.